The wilderness does not care about your grit. It does not care about your personal milestones or the sweat you have poured into the dirt to prove you are still alive. People come to Alaska to find themselves, but more often than not the land finds them first. It is a vast, cold machine of stone and ice that has been grinding bones into dust for millions of years. We like to think that because we have mapped the peaks and named the trails, we own the place. But when the mist rolls in, and the temperature drops 40 degrees in an hour, you realize you are just a soft, warm piece of meat, moving through a cathedral of indifference. The 4th of July in Seward is supposed to be a celebration of human endurance, a festival of muscle and lungs against the vertical cruelty of Mount Marathon. But in 2012, the mountain decided to keep a souvenir. Seward sits on the edge of Resurrection Bay, a name that carries more irony than most of the tourists realize. Every year, thousands of people gather to watch runners scramble up 3,000 feet of jagged shale and mud. It is a brutal tradition, a race that leaves participants bleeding and broken their lungs, screaming for oxygen that the thin air refuses to provide. The mountain itself is a wall of green and grey rising straight out of the sea like a warning. On that particular Independence Day, the air was thick with the smell of salt and wood smoke. The town was alive with the sound of thousands of cheering voices, but higher up past the tree line, the atmosphere was shifting into something far more sinister. The clouds were heavy, sagging under the weight of an approaching front that would turn the peak into a ghost world of grey on grey. Michael LeMaitre was 66 years old. He was a grandfather, a businessman, and a man who believed in finishing what he started. He was not an elite athlete, but he had the kind of stubbornness that keeps a man moving long after his body has begged him to stop. This was his first time running Mount Marathon, and he knew he would be slow. He knew the younger men would pass him like mountain goats, leaving him to labor in their wake. He wore a black sweatshirt, black shorts, and a determined look that probably felt like armor at the time. By the time he reached the upper slopes, the celebration in the streets below was a distant, muffled memory. He was alone with the sound of his own heavy breathing and the rhythmic scrape of his shoes against the loose sliding rock. The race officials were stationed at the top near a large rock that serves as the turnaround point. It is a desolate place, a graveyard of scree, where the wind never truly stops blowing. By 5:30 in the afternoon, the vast majority of the runners had already descended, sliding down the snowfields and shale to the finish line, where cold beer and applause awaited them. The weather had turned foul. A freezing rain was falling, mixed with a mist so dense you could barely see your own outstretched hand. The two race officials at the summit were cold, wet, and ready to leave. They saw Michael. He was about 80 yards below the turnaround point, laboring upward through the gloom. They called out to him, telling him he just had to reach the rock, and then he could head back down. They did not wait for him to reach them. They assumed, as anyone would, that a man who had climbed that far would simply turn around and follow the only path back to safety. That was the last time any human eye rested on Michael LeMaitre. 80 yards from the turn. A distance so short you could throw a stone and hit it. The officials headed down, disappearing into the fog, leaving the 66-year-old man to navigate the final stretch of the ascent alone. In the logic of the mountains, 80 yards is nothing, but in the logic of the unexplained, it is a vast yawning chasm. When Michael did not cross the finish line by 8 in the evening, the celebration in Seward began to sour. The music felt too loud, the laughter too sharp. His wife was waiting at the bottom, her eyes fixed on the trail, watching every runner emerge from the tree line. But the man in the black sweatshirt never appeared. The mountain had gone silent, swallowed by a ceiling of cloud that refused to lift. The search began that night, but the mountain was in no mood to cooperate. Alaska state troopers, local volunteers, and search and rescue teams scrambled into the dark, their headlamps cutting weak yellow holes in the freezing mist. They expected to find him huddled under a ledge, perhaps with a broken ankle or early-stage hypothermia. They expected a man of his age to be exhausted, sitting somewhere just off the trail, waiting for a light to find him. But as the hours turned into days, the reality of the situation began to settle like silt at the bottom of a cold lake. They found nothing. No footprints in the mud, no bits of black fabric caught on the jagged rocks, no disturbed patches of scree where a man might have slipped and tumbled. It was as if the mountain had opened a mouth and closed it before anyone could hear a scream. For the next several days, the scale of the search grew to massive proportions. Helicopters equipped with sophisticated thermal imaging cameras swept the slopes, their blades thumping against the heavy air. These cameras are designed to pick up the heat signature of a rabbit from hundreds of feet in the air, let alone a grown man. They flew over every gully, every ravine, and every treacherous drop-off. They found nothing but the cold uniform temperature of whetstone. Below them, hundreds of ground searchers moved in grids, shoulder to shoulder, literally poking the ground with sticks. They combed the area around the turnaround point with microscopic precision. They searched the technical cliffs and the hidden crevasses. The results were always the same. Total absolute silence. Michael LeMaitre had vanished from a fixed course on a mountain crawling with people. There is a specific kind of horror in a disappearance like this. It is not like a hiker getting lost in the deep woods where they might wander for miles in the wrong direction. Mount Marathon is a confined space. There are only so many places a body can go. If he had fallen, he would be at the bottom of a slope. If he had sought shelter, he would be in a cave or under a ledge. But the searchers looked in every cave and under every ledge. They rappelled down cliffs that even the most experienced climbers avoid. They checked the drainage pipes and the thickest brush near the base. The mountain was stripped bare by the eyes of the searchers, and yet it revealed nothing. It was as if Michael had reached that 80-yard mark and simply walked out of our dimension and into another one. We have to talk about the physical sensations of that day. The mist on Mount Marathon isn't just water vapor. It is a heavy, clinging shroud that deadens sound and distorts distance. When you are up there, the world shrinks to a circle of 5 feet around you. You lose your sense of horizon. You lose your sense of up and down. The rock under your feet feels like it is moving, shifting like the scales of a great prehistoric beast. Some people who have survived near misses on that peak talk about a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread that comes on without warning. They describe a feeling of being watched by something that does not have eyes, a pressure in the ears that suggests a change in atmospheric density. It is in these moments of sensory deprivation that the anomalies seem to happen, the moments where the rules of physics seem to fray at the edges. Some skeptics will say he simply fell into a crevasse that the searchers missed. But those who know the mountain best say that is nearly impossible given the intensity of the search. Others suggest he might have wandered off the trail in a state of hypothermic mountain sickness, his brain scrambled by the cold and lack of sugar. But even a delirious man leaves a trail. A shoe, a hat, a smear of blood on a rock. Michael left nothing. He didn't even leave a scent for the search dogs. The canines, trained to find a human being under feet of snow or debris, were baffled. They would track to a certain point and then simply stop whining and circling as if the trail had ascended directly into the sky. The dogs know when something isn't right. They can sense the absence of a life force where there should be one. The search was eventually called off after weeks of fruitless labor. Michael LeMaitre was declared legally dead, a victim of the mountain, but the lack of a body remains a jagged pill for his family to swallow. There was no closure, only a permanent question mark etched into the landscape of Seward. The race continues every year. People still run, they still bleed, and they still celebrate at the finish line. But for those who were there in 2012, the mountain looks different now. It looks hungry. It looks like a place where the veil between the known and the unknown is dangerously thin. You can stand at that turnaround point today and look out over the bay, and if the mist starts to roll in, you will feel it. That cold, creeping realization that you are not alone, yet you are utterly abandoned. What happened in those 80 yards? Did Michael see something in the fog that led him away from the path? There are theories about geological anomalies, pockets of infrasound that cause hallucinations and panic. There are darker theories about things that live in the high places, things that have been here much longer than we have. In the world of the missing, there is a recurring theme of people vanishing near summits, often during sudden weather shifts, and often in areas that have been searched multiple times. It is a pattern that defies conventional logic. We want to believe that if we are careful, if we are brave, if we follow the trail, we will be safe. But Michael LeMaitre followed the trail. He was brave. He was careful. And yet, he is gone. This case bears a chilling resemblance to the disappearance of Joe Keller in the mountains of Colorado. Joe was a young man, a runner who went for a jog on a well-worn trail and simply evaporated. Like Michael, he was in a localized area. Like Michael, massive searches found absolutely no trace of him for an incredible amount of time. Then there is the case of Keith Reinhard in Silver Plume, who walked into the mountains and was never seen again, leaving behind a trail of strange writings and a town full of unanswered questions. These are not just accidents. They are erasures. They are reminders that the map is not the territory, and the territory has a habit of reclaiming its own. We are just visitors on this rock, and sometimes the rock decides it is time for us to stay. Forever. Michael LeMaitre is still out there somewhere in the shale and the mist. a silent witness to whatever it is that waits for us at the top of the mountain. The mountain does not care about your pedigree. It does not care about the months of training you put in or the expensive moisture-wicking fabric clinging to your ribs. To the rock and the ice, you are just a temporary collection of salt and water moving upward against the inevitable pull of gravity. In the small coastal town of Seward, Alaska, this cold truth is celebrated every 4th of July during the Mount Marathon race. It is a brutal, vertical scramble that leaves athletes gasping for air while their lungs burn with the scent of spruce and damp earth. But in 2012, the mountain decided it was finished with the celebration. It decided to keep something for itself. Michael LeMaitre was a 54-year-old man who believed he was challenging the terrain, but the terrain was merely waiting for him to reach the right elevation. The air that afternoon was a thick, cloying grey, the kind of mist that swallows sound and softens the edges of the world. Michael was the last runner on the course, a solitary figure, struggling against the 3,000-foot incline. He was seen by race officials near the turnaround point at the summit, just a ghost of a man emerging from the whiteout conditions. They saw him, they acknowledged him, and then they watched him turn back toward the descent. It should have been a simple trip down, a gravity-assisted jog through the shale and the mud. But between that summit official and the next checkpoint, a distance of less than 80 yards, the world simply opened up and swallowed him whole. There were no screams, no sounds of a fall, just a sudden and absolute silence that settled over the ridge like a shroud. When the search began, the atmosphere shifted from festive to frantic. Rescuers moved through the brush with a desperate intensity, their boots churning the black Alaskan soil into a slick slurry. They looked for the bright colors of Michael's gear, expecting to find a twisted ankle or a man hunkered down against the wind. Instead, they found a landscape that seemed to have been scrubbed clean of human presence. The microscopic observation of the ground revealed nothing. No scuff marks in the lichen, no broken twigs, no fibers snagged on the jagged edges of the rocks. It was as if he had been lifted off the face of the earth by an invisible hand. The searchers felt a prickling at the back of their necks, a sensation of being watched by something that resided in the very bones of the mountain. The search dogs were brought in their noses, twitching as they tried to catch a thread of Michael's scent in the freezing wind. These animals are trained to find life, or the echo of it, but on that ridge they found only a void. They would reach a certain point in the trail and simply stop whining and circling as if the trail had ascended directly into the sky. The dogs know when something is not right. They can sense the absence of a life force where there should be one, a hole in the frequency of the natural world. Their handlers watched in growing unease as the animals refused to move forward, their hackles raised against an enemy that no one could see. The mountain was not just a pile of stone anymore, it was a predator that had finished its meal. The search was eventually called off after weeks of fruitless labor and thousands of man-hours. Michael LeMaitre was declared legally dead, a victim of the mountain, but the lack of a body remains a jagged pill for his family to swallow. There was no closure, only a permanent question mark etched into the landscape of Seward. The race continues every year because the human spirit is stubborn and prone to forgetting the dangers of the wild. People still run, they still bleed, and they still celebrate at the finish line with sweat stinging their eyes. But for those who were there in 2012, the mountain looks different now. It looks hungry. It looks like a place where the veil between the known and the unknown is dangerously thin, vibrating with a low-frequency hum that speaks of ancient things. You can stand at that turnaround point today and look out over the bay, and if the mist starts to roll in, you will feel it. That cold, creeping realization that you are not alone yet, you are utterly abandoned. What happened in those 80 yards? Did Michael see something in the fog that led him away from the path, a flickering light or a shape that did not belong in the clouds? There are theories about geological anomalies, pockets of infrasound that cause hallucinations and sudden, blinding panic. This frequency below the range of human hearing can vibrate the fluid in the inner ear and the eyes, creating a sense of dread and phantom shadows. Perhaps Michael did not run away from something but was driven away by a sound he could only feel in his marrow. There are darker theories about things that live in the high places, things that have been here much longer than we have. In the world of the missing, there is a recurring theme of people vanishing near summits, often during sudden weather shifts, and often in areas that have been searched multiple times. It is a pattern that defies conventional logic and mocks the efforts of modern technology. We use satellites and thermal imaging and ground-penetrating radar, yet the Earth still manages to hide its secrets in plain sight. It is as if the terrain itself is sentient, shifting its features to hide the evidence of its hunger. We want to believe that if we are careful, if we are brave, if we follow the trail, we will be safe. But Michael LeMaitre followed the trail. He was brave. He was careful. And yet, he is gone. This case bears a chilling resemblance to the disappearance of Joe Keller in the mountains of Colorado. Joe was a young man, a runner in the prime of his life, who went for a jog on a well-worn trail and simply evaporated into the thin mountain air. It was 2015 and Joe was staying at a ranch in the Conejos Canyon. He told his friends he would be back in an hour, a simple run to clear his head before the evening set in. He was wearing shorts and running shoes, carrying nothing but his own determination. When he did not return, the ranch became the center of a massive search operation that spanned nearly a year. Like Michael, he was in a localized area, a place where he should have been found within hours. The search for Joe Keller involved hundreds of volunteers, canine units, and drones that buzzed over the canyon like angry insects. They found nothing. No footprints in the dust, no discarded water bottles, no signs of a struggle. It was as if Joe had stepped off the edge of a map and into a blank space where physics no longer applied. His family spent thousands of dollars and countless days scouring the brush, their eyes growing weary from staring at the same patches of dirt and stone. Then, nearly a year later, his remains were found in an area that had been searched multiple times. He was located at the base of a cliff, but the condition of his body and the location raised more questions than they answered. Why had the dogs missed him? Why had the infrared cameras seen nothing? Then there is the case of Keith Reinhard in Silver Plume, Colorado, which took place in 1988. Keith was a man who became obsessed with a disappearance that had happened in the same town years prior. He walked into the mountains behind his shop and was never seen again, leaving behind a trail of strange writings that suggested he knew something was coming for him. He wrote about the mountains being a place of transition, a place where a man could lose his identity and become part of the stone. He walked up toward the summit of Pendleton Mountain in the late afternoon, much like Michael LeMaitre, and vanished as the shadows began to stretch across the valley. The search for Keith was extensive, but the rugged terrain of the Rockies is a fortress of secrets. These are not just accidents or instances of hikers getting lost in the woods. They are erasures. They are moments where the identity of a human being is stripped away by a landscape that does not recognize our sovereignty. We build roads and we name the peaks, but the mountains remain indifferent to our labels. They are reminders that the map is not the territory, and the territory has a habit of reclaiming its own. We are just visitors on this rock, walking on a thin crust of civilization that could crack at any moment. Sometimes the rock decides it is time for us to stay. Forever. It does not ask permission, and it does not offer an explanation to the grieving families left behind in the parking lots and the base camps. Michael LeMaitre is still out there somewhere in the shale and the mist, a silent witness to whatever it is that waits for us at the top of the mountain. Perhaps he is part of the fog now, a lingering energy that watches the new runners struggle up the slope every July. His story is a warning to those who think they have conquered the wild. You do not conquer the mountain, you merely survive it until it decides your time is up. The 80 yards that Michael traveled are a bridge to a place we are not meant to understand. As you hike your next trail or run your next race, remember that the ground beneath your feet is older than your ancestors, and it has a memory that spans eons. It knows where you are even when no one else does. The patterns we see in these cases are too consistent to be mere coincidence. The proximity to water, the sudden change in weather, the location near a summit or a boulder field, these are the markers of a predatory environment. In the case of Joe Keller, the impossibility of his disappearance in such a short window of time suggests a force that operates outside of our standard understanding of animal behavior. There were no tracks of a mountain lion, no sign of a bear. Just a young man who was there 1 minute and gone the next. The same can be said for Keith Reinhard, who seemed to be walking toward a fate he had already visualized. It is a terrifying thought that our own curiosity or our drive for physical excellence might be the very thing that leads us into the mouth of the unknown. We must look at the similarities between these men. They were all mobile, they were all in relatively good health, and they were all alone when the end came. The silence of the mountain is not empty, it is heavy with the weight of those who never came home. When we talk about these disappearances, we are talking about the limits of human knowledge. We are talking about the places where the light of our flashlights fails to penetrate the darkness. Michael, Joe, and Keith are names on a long list of individuals who stepped into the wild and found something that didn't want them to leave. Their stories are the ghost stories of the modern age, told not around a campfire, but in the quiet moments when we realize how small we truly are. The mountain looks down on Seward today with the same cold eyes it had in 2012. It watched the helicopters, it watched the grieving wife, and it watched the volunteers tear their hands on the brush. It said nothing. It gave nothing back. The mystery of Michael LeMaitre is not just about a missing runner, it is about the fragility of our existence. We are one missed, one wrong turn, 180-yard stretch away from becoming a legend ourselves. The next time you find yourself on a high ridge and the wind begins to die down into a heavy, unnatural silence, do not wait for the fog to roll in. Turn back. Because the mountain is always hungry and it is patient enough to wait for the next person who thinks they are brave enough to reach the top. This phenomenon is not isolated to the peaks of Alaska or the canyons of Colorado. It is a global shadow. Consider the disappearance of Geraldine Largay on the Appalachian Trail, a seasoned hiker who vanished just feet from the path and remained missing for 2 years despite one of the largest searches in state history. Or the case of Danny Philippidis, who disappeared from a ski mountain in New York and reappeared 6 days later in California, dazed and with no memory of how he traveled 3,000 miles. These cases like that of Michael LeMaitre suggest that our reality is far more porous than we care to admit. The mountains are not just scenery, they are the walls of a labyrinth, and sometimes the walls move. Stay on the trail, keep your eyes on the horizon, and never assume that you are the one in control. The silence is listening.